nothing easy about having a child with diabetes. I don't personally have a child with diabetes. I can't imagine the frustration that goes along with the daily regimen of making sure that your child survives, because that's really what it's about. And then the feelings that accompany that of feeling isolated or sometimes lonely in different environments because of this new reality that you live with. And that's what I really want to delve into here. And the most important thing that I'll emphasize right here from the beginning is that you're not alone. And the purpose of this webinar is to make sure that you feel that you're not alone and that you hear your story through the course of the sharing of our stories and the questions online. Before we get started, I want to introduce you to this panel of experts that has so graciously given up their time and their energy and their talents to join us tonight. So we're going to start right here. Our parents, you represent the dads. This is Sam Jarzinski. You have a son who has diabetes who is 13 years old.
Right.
So right in the middle of the teenage time period and transition. The next one that we have here is Ursilia Cologne. Ursilia has two children who live with diabetes, one that's 19 and one that's now 25, both boys.
Yes.
And it's diabetes is relatively new to Ursilia. It's only been the last 3 years, right?
Right.
Okay, our next panelist is Dr. Kathy Bradley Klug. She's a psychologist who specializes in pediatric school psychology right here at the University of South Florida College of Education. And we're so happy that you've joined us. And then last but certainly not least, he's a celebrity in diabetes, Joe Solowaychek. And Joe is a nurse, you're a certified diabetes educator, and a family therapist.
Yes.
And known all over the country about keeping it real with diabetes and helping families cope better. So thank you everybody for joining us. So Joe, why is it that so many families struggle with this notion of frustration in living with diabetes?
It's a great question. It's a great place to start with. I can also not speak for, I don't have a child with diabetes, but I have lived with it for 52 years and have been working in the field for about 32. And I can tell you that the thing that comes up most for most of the families that I work with, and for myself included as a patient, is that I don't think it takes rocket science to manage diabetes. I think at the beginning you're scared and you're afraid that you're not going to get it. And the first question you're asking the hospital is, when can we leave? And then when they want to discharge you, they say, can we live here? Because they're so scared about going home and doing it by themselves. But I think at the end of the day, after you've sort of learned the things that you need to learn, it has a lot to do with it's like another full-time job. And I think that that contributes to the frustration. It's ongoing, it's no stop, there are no breaks. If you're the parent of a child, you have to assume some of the sort of kids' feelings and sort of thoughts about what they're going through, how they're going through it. You have to keep balancing things. There's not one part of your lives that is not touched by diabetes. Now, at the end of the day, the goal is to make sure that everybody unfolds into their lives and has a life and is doing what they do. It shouldn't stop you from doing anything, but you have to bring a lot of courage and determination as you're going through it. And the feeling when you're hit with this at first is that if you've never had a child diagnosed with a chronic illness and you know nothing about this disease, you're at a loss as to how you're going to make it. And that's why support communities are so important.
Now a lot of people tend to fall into a trap after they've had a child diagnosed and maybe have been living with disease for a little while, where they isolate themselves because that's how they can control their environment. Is there danger in that?
There's total danger in that, because what ends up happening is that you're all alone. And I think if you want, you can do it all by yourself, but it's extremely lonely. And it's extremely lonely for your kids, and it's extremely lonely for your family. The goal in learning how to manage diabetes is so that your life after diagnosis looks as close to what it was prior to diagnosis. If you were lonely before diagnosis, then you should stay lonely. But if you were actively engaged and with people and doing stuff, and your kids were, and you were traveling and all that kind of stuff, then you should get back into doing that. Now, the should get back into do it, you should do it as soon as you can. Everybody's on their own time schedule, and they have a lot of things that they have to everybody's balancing and juggling different things. But the bottom line is that over the course of time, your life should unfold as it would have had you not had the diabetes, while taking into consideration that things have changed. It's a firewall, which tends towards isolation sometimes, because you frustrated, angry, resentful, rageful at life for handing you this card, you know, this kind of stuff. So
And that's normal.
and that's totally normal. You're nuts if you don't have those
Yeah.
things. So, yeah.
You know, Kathy, I know that you've got expertise in a whole realm of healthcare conditions for pediatrics and children who live with illnesses and families. How do you, or how have you advised families that are dealing with these kinds of issues of where do I put all of this frustration and anger, and then how do I deal with communities or social settings where I'm feeling isolated? Maybe I'm not causing that, but I feel this way.
Right. And I also want to say that I am not a parent of a child with diabetes, but as Nicole said, I do work with families and children who are coping with a variety of types of chronic illnesses. And I think, first of all, it's important to acknowledge the feelings of the parents. And it's okay to feel lonely, it's okay to feel frustrated, it's okay to feel isolated, and that is part of the normal progression. What I like to do with families, with parents, is to help problem solve. And one of the ways to do that is to look at what resources are available for the family. So to help them with that feeling of isolation and frustration. And we kind of go through what are the resources that you have available now, and what resources would you like to have available, and how can we strengthen those? So within those resources, we look at child resources. And one of the issues is, how much does your child understand about the chronic condition? And sometimes that's referred to in the literature as health literacy. But how much can the child take on in terms of responsibility for managing the disease so that you don't feel quite so isolated? We look at family resources and how the condition impacts the family and the siblings in the family, and what resources can we put in place there to support the family. We also look at community resources that are available, mental health resources for family, as well as medical resources, and what's available in the geographic area for the family. We also look at school resources, and as a parent of two boys in schools, you know, when you take your child to school at 8 in the morning and they're there until 3:15 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you're leaving your child with people that, you know, you hope you can trust and hope you will help you with that feeling of frustration and isolation. So developing those connections with school folks so that you don't feel like you have to do it all on your own, and so that you have individuals that can take on some of the responsibility.
And school psychologists are a good example of people that are willing to help, right?
Absolutely. I think, first of all, we think of school nurses when we think of chronic health conditions, but school psychologists, pediatric school psychologists, those are also folks within the educational setting who are knowledgeable about a variety of different chronic health conditions and can serve to help educate the educators, because that's a big piece of it. And I know Bringing Science Home put together the 10 tips for educators, for teachers, working with students with type 1 diabetes, and that's a wonderful handout. So resources like that we can share with, for example, in the school setting, to say, here's what you need to know to help my child, and let's communicate and talk about that.
Well, you know, I want to turn to Ursilia and Sam to just get your input. I mean, how have you dealt with a lot of the frustration or the frustrating things that come along with life with diabetes?
Go first? Well, I was very fortunate that when my youngest son was first diagnosed, that I had a very good friend, Nicole Johnson, on board with me to sort of hold my hand and teach me, and I had a big community. But sometimes I did have to be talked down off the ledge, so to speak, at like 11 o'clock at night when everything's quiet and you're the sheer terror of, is my child going to wake up tomorrow morning? Because this is what goes through your mind when you're first diagnosed with diabetes. And you just have to bring in a community, and you have to have faith that you're going to have friends like Nicole and Sam, and you have to tap into your doctor's office and the diabetes educators. Like Joe and the doctor were saying, you have to tap into those resources because you don't have the slightest idea what's going on. And it's a day by day by day learning adjustment process to your life is normal, whatever normal is.
Does it become
Again,
normal?
yes, now it's a part of our lives. So, you know,
Definitely. Well, my son was younger, he was 6 when he was diagnosed. So at that point, he's in an elementary school where we know absolutely nothing about diabetes. So in addition to educating ourselves and educating a 6-year-old, which he did very, very well and started doing his own injections immediately and everything, but we had to educate the people in the school. Because I think the statistics are something like 1 child in every elementary school would have diabetes, and this school didn't have any diabetics. So none of the teachers, none of the educators were able to really help. So we became, like you said, good friends with the teachers there because we were there quite often and came to rely on them. But one of the frustrating things, he moved out of elementary school into a middle school that had 2,000 kids. And it wasn't the touchy-feely elementary school that you're used to. Now they lock the school down and you can't get in to eat lunch with your child or anything. So we actually ended up changing schools because of that, to make sure he's safe. And that's part of our biggest frustration is, how do you keep your child safe? I can keep him safe at home and when he's playing sports and all of that. We help the coaches and volunteer as assistant coaches, but the actual hands-on in the school when he's there the majority of his day, what do you do? Who do you trust? And we took it upon ourselves to educate the teachers and educate our child. So he's pretty much self-sufficient at 13. We still get the occasional call that something's gone wrong, but it minimizes the risk, which is the best thing I think you can hope for.
It is, and I want to encourage our audience that's watching through the connection, post your questions about school environments, because I want to delve into this just a little bit more, because I think this is the core frustration for parents of young children. Am I right, Joe?
No, I think so, big time. And I think that, as Sam was saying, it's one thing to be able to control your environment at home and make it safe. I don't have kids, but I don't even know how parents let their kids out of the house without a chronic illness, let alone with a serious one like diabetes where you have to manage it so well. And I think the frustration is getting the help that you need to remove obstacles from the child. That's why the American Civil Disabilities Act was the 504 plan, and all of those things are in place to help parents and help families and kids with diabetes have the smoothest, least resistant experience in a school setting, and it's mandated federally.
Exactly. So you have protections, but let's dive in even to a practical level. I mean, what are some steps, and this is to anybody on the panel, what are some steps that families can take, whether it's elementary, middle, high school, to make sure that you're handling the frustration that's before you and not allowing your child to become isolated because of systems? So what about in schools, Kathy?
I would recommend starting with the school psychologist if there's one in the school. Every school has a school psychologist that serves it. They may not be there every day, but the school psychologist would be one of the first people to contact. The school nurse is another one. And again, in a lot of our schools, there's not a school nurse there every day, but you can find out when they're there. And set up a meeting with a team. You want the student's teacher there. If it's elementary school, there may be just a couple of teachers. If it's middle school or high school, you're dealing with teams of teachers, and so it takes a little bit more work. But to advocate for your child, and to be honest, a lot of folks in the schools, as Sam was saying, do not know about diabetes. They don't know the difference between type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes. They don't know about the signs and symptoms. They don't know about insulin pumps. We've heard stories about teachers who thought that an insulin pump was a cell phone or beeper and took it away from the child. So we need to develop preventive types of strategies, as well as what do you do if there's a crisis. We also need to let our educators know that the children are going to need to drink lots of water. They're going to need to leave the room. They're going to need to check their blood sugar. And the other piece with school is to educate the peers.
Yeah.
To educate the other students in the classroom so that it's not seen as something strange or unusual. This is part of diabetes management, so everybody can learn about it, and I think that's so important. But lots of times the advocacy has to start with the parent.
But I think a lot of times what ends up happening is that parents are so, going back to what we first started talking about, where they're so upset and so anxious that they bring a lot of those feelings to the event at school.
Yeah.
And what ends up happening is I would recommend that most parents, if they can, not go in with guns blazing,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
That they align themselves with advocates for them as well. Maybe when I worked as a diabetes nurse in a clinic, I would, for every kid that I worked with in my entire career, I would offer to go and do an in-service to the school.
Yes.
My experience of schools is that everybody's really willing to work with you as long as they know what's going on. Most people become silly, quote unquote, because of ignorance, not because they're malicious or they have it in for your kid or in for you. You know what I mean? It has much to do with how they're feeling. And my experience was that as I went into the schools and did the in-service and gave people my pager, my phone number, and resources and access for them, they had questions, that their fears were alleviated and they became calm, and then it became a smooth environment. That's not saying that that happens all the time, but I think that that's what, if I were a parent, I would want to get my nurse educator to go in and do an in-service, you know, and to check with the principal, before the kid comes back to school. And so, you know, I just want to know, how can we work together to make things happen here?
That's a great suggestion, and actually, our folks online are posting all kinds of things.
Good.
So let me tell you a couple of the things that they've posted. Thanks, guys, for posting. One parent said that he or she provides a cheat sheet for each teacher, and that has really helped with their experience.
Brilliant.
That's an excellent
Now,
suggestion.
Have you found that parents can just create that on their own, or is there a resource that is best for parents to use as a cheat sheet to print out and take in?
JDRF has cheat sheets, Children with Diabetes has cheat sheets.
Yes.
Yeah.
The local ADA and the National ADA, American Diabetes Association, have cheat sheets and school forms and packets that, if you're doing that, but it's a brilliant idea.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah.
You know, we've got another one that just came in too. It says the teachers and the educators were great, but when the student went to college, it was challenging. And so at college, they found a health advocate to help with the dorm,
Yeah.
to help with healthcare, and but there was challenges then when the parent went to the ER when necessary, because the ER treated the parent unfairly. And actually the quote is as an uninformed mom, which tends to sometimes happen in transitions, doesn't it?
Yes.
Well, with my children, mine are in college age now.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing when they get a new doctor, or, you know, I try to back them up, it's their thing, but I'm there for support, is that first thing I say is sign a HIPAA form, sign a HIPAA form. Educate your child is to tell the doctor that it's okay to communicate with me. Because I do have to give my child support and guidance in making big life and death health issue decisions. We make them together as a family. So you have to educate your child as to fill out what form to tell a doctor who he can and cannot talk to, because those are legalities. And the
Right.
doctor has his hand tied. So if your child knows, you know, what to do in the
Exactly.
beginning, if you sign a form at the very beginning when he has a new doctor, and we moms that are sitting at home with our kids in college biting our fingernails, I wonder if he's okay, I wonder if he's drinking juice, I wonder if he's drinking beer. You know, you sort of can be a little bit involved in those decision-making processes with your child.
That's a good
Yes.
recommendation. So knowledge of the appropriate type
Yes.
of forms and even researching that as a family can be a nice kind of bonding mechanism to defray some of the isolation.
I always advocate to the families that I work with to go to the school, make a visit ahead of time, identify a doctor, identify a pharmacist,
Yes.
and make yourself known to student health before stuff happens.
Right.
Because then when stuff happens, you're a known quantity and you're not falling from the sky. And they know,
Exactly,
oh,
yeah.
here comes Joe, you know, this kind of thing.
You know, and one of the things that we've found in working with so many young adults here at the University of South Florida is, although we don't like this terminology, it is important to identify yourself to the Students with Disabilities Office, because if something comes up with a test or an exam or whatever in a classroom environment, if you haven't identified yourself with the Students with Disabilities Office, you may not be able to take advantage of the types of accommodations that could be available to someone with diabetes. Now, I hate saying students with disabilities, because that goes against everything inside of me as a person with diabetes, but it's another important tool to put in the toolbox.
The other thing that I just wanted to put out there that we touched upon, and that is that we were talking about lonely family versus community, so in terms of staying connected.
Right.
But I can tell you that as a family therapist, there are many times where family members become isolated and lonely within the family, which is why I think it's so important to get some kind of family counseling at the beginning, to have mom and dad, if it's a two-parent family, to have, if it's a single-parent family, to have extended family and friends come in for the diabetes education, so that you're not doing it alone. I can't emphasize that enough, to make sure that your friends and extended family come in, and then also to have someone who's skilled enough to ask, how do you handle things at home? And how are you going to deal with this? And how are you affected by this? And to have some conversation among the adults and the parents to make sure that they're on the same team. Because if one of them is sort of isolating and the other one's trying to hold things up, that's normal in response to stress and trauma. But it has to flip around again to reach some kind of some equilibrium that was there before the diagnosis. And undiscussed, people even within the family can feel alone. So, we need to have some resources there for that.
That happens a lot, and I would suspect that that tends to happen at life transition points, whether it's transitioning into a world of high school athletics or transitioning into college life, that people get left out.
Well, and I think also the thing about the most salient feeling that I think comes up for most parents when the kids are diagnosed is the spiritual and psychological one of powerlessness. And if we're, to the best of your ability as a parent, if your thing is that you can protect your child from any harm. When your kid gets diagnosed with a disease like diabetes, you're suddenly confronted with the experience that you're not. That can make you feel very lonely and isolated. And just coming to terms with that.
As we wrap up this part of our conversation, I want to turn to Sam and Arcelia. Do you guys have any final comments about how you best cope?
At the school level, to get back to that a little bit, we, like Joe said, we met with the teachers, we met with them before the school year started every year. We'd bring in donuts and all the teachers a lot of times had morning meetings, and we came into the morning meetings and brought them donuts, and oh, by the way, here's a little information on diabetes, signs and symptoms that you might want to be aware of. If he passes out, that could be an issue. We gave them low boxes, which is just a little Tupperware box with the signs and symptoms taped to the box, with our cell phone number taped to the box, and then glucotabs and other snacks and stuff to get them through an emergency situation. And it's just all about education, and that helps to alleviate some of the isolation that he might experience, is get other people involved. And we ended up becoming best friends with one of the teachers at the school that we still hang out with now 6 or 8 years later, that has become one of our best friends. So.
Sam, and how about for you and your wife?
Things are going good with us. I mean, we try to do it as a team, and we just celebrated our 20th anniversary, so we've been together for quite a while, and I'm sure that helps. If you don't have a significant other, you definitely need to bring other people in, because my wife and I do talk about it, and we discuss, what's the best situation, and we bring our child into that same, we'll sit down and talk and say, what's the best thing for you in this situation, and we want his input. He has to be able to go off to school.
Yes.
He has to be able to make these relationships once he leaves the house, and that's the best way to do it, is educating everybody.
You're dealing with a very different environment, Arcelia.
When Robert was first diagnosed, he was at a very small school, and we created awareness with the teachers, with the cheat sheets, and they bent over backwards for him. So in that sense, when Robert went to school, I felt like he was almost safer than when he was at home with me, because he had 1,000 sets of eyes on him, and everybody knew what to do just in case. And I was also very proud because he educated everyone at that school. Now, my oldest son is 25 now. He was diagnosed at the age of 23, and he was almost misdiagnosed as a type 2 because he was too old, and that was very frustrating, not to be there in that moment to say, no, my child has this, and I know what to do. You have to help. It's very you're just desperate at that point, and he's a man, so it's harder for me to let him go a little bit, and at the same time be there for him. There's a fine line where you can't be a helicopter mom, but you do have to support your child. And sometimes I'm a single mom, I'm a widow, they're very kind, and they comfort me. Sometimes there's a little role reversal, because they say, Mom, I don't know how I make it through the day without you. And I go, don't talk to your mother like that. And sorry, Mom, I'm sorry. I know this is hard on you. So as your child gets a little bit older, let them know that it's not just about them. What happens to one person in your family, whether it's diabetes or whatever it is, affects all the members of the family. And you have to have compassion for everyone, not just for that kid with the diabetes. That helps the family, dynamic run a little more smooth.
Well, thank you for giving so much of your insights into this important topic. The bottom line is we have to become creative about how we approach diabetes and how we educate those that are around us so that we can then better deal with the feelings of frustration or anger or even isolation. And we've heard some really great practical steps and tips and tricks that can help people along the way. We wish we had more time to share more information about it. But the phraseology that I loved the most from this conversation is that relationships really do matter. And there's a phrase that I like so much, it's friends are medicine. So don't forget that you have friends and diabetes and you're never alone with what you're dealing with. So many others like you have been there as well, and you can make it.